Hello, everyone. Today, I hope you're doing well, and I welcome you to the class. Today, I will be discussing the bullwhip effect in supply chain management, and subsequently, I will also discuss a case study that I have authored myself on PSO and the bullwhip effect within PSO. So, just to start off with, on the front cover of this presentation, you can see an actual bullwhip. And what you'll see over here is that generally speaking, there is the variation, there is almost like a ripple effect. At the beginning, the bullwhips doesn't seem to be making as much of traction, or as there's not as much movement as there is towards the end, and there's a whole lot of movement at the end of this bullwhip. And so generally this is used and the whole idea, the reason that this phenomena is called the bullwhip effect is, as we'll just see in a little while, that when there is a shift in customer demand, it has a ripple effect that is amplified as you move further along in the supply chain. So without further ado, I'm going to get our arms a little bit around the bullwhip effect and really try and understand this a little bit more in depth. And probably a good place to start is at the definition. So the bullwhip effect is basically a shift in what the bullwhip effect, says is when there is a shift in customer demand, then as you move further along the supply chain, there is a lot of fluctuation in the inventory. Again, I'll repeat another definition. The bullwhip effect is a distribution channel phenomena in which forecast yields supply chain inefficiencies. It refers to increasing swings in inventory in response to shifts in customer demand as one moves further up the supply chain. Wow, that's a lot of words over there. And so in order for us to really understand what all of this means, it's probably good to have a look at this particular slide. And this slide makes it easier for us to understand what's going on. What are they talking about? So over here, again, you see that there's a gentleman, the customer, right? And you see that there is a regular swing or shift. There seems to be an up and down movement along this curve. Is getting bigger and bigger as it's moving down the supply chain. Just to give you an example, let's say you go to a grocery store and you decide to buy 10 units. Could be 10 units. Maybe what happens is that you hear about the coronavirus, so you decide to go and you decide to get, lots, 10 units of wheat, or flour. So you decide to buy 10 units of flour, and you decide that you just want to keep some in reserve in your house just in case there's a shortage. Okay, well, in that case, now that you have gone and bought 10 units of wheat, what happens is that the retailer or the store says, oh, wow, we just sold 10 units of wheat. Well, maybe we should place an order for 15 units of wheat. And we should let our distributor know that tomorrow they should deliver 15 units of wheat. Now you might ask, why 15? If you sold 10, why not 10? Well, generally speaking, retailers like to keep a safety stock, meaning that tomorrow some additional people may come in and want to buy even more wheat. So they place an order for 15 units of wheat. Now, once this order goes to the distributor says, okay, well, the retailer wants 15 units of wheat, but the thing is, I should probably place an order for 20 units And maybe their reason for placing an order for 20 units is that they will get a big discount if they place a bulk order. And so they place an order for 20 units of wheat and of flour or wheat, whatever. And then what happens is that the distributor basically says, okay, I'm going to just order 20 units, but you know what? Let me just keep some extra. So I want to take advantage of the discount that I might be getting. And I'm also going to place 2 units so that I also have some safety stock. So they go ahead and place an order for 40 units to the manufacturer. Now, as you can see, that the shift in the inventory levels is increasing as you're moving down the supply chain. So the original demand, there was an increase of demand for 10 units that translated in an increase of 15 units to the retailer, of 20 units to the distributor, and then 40 units to the actual manufacturer. So we'll see, what we're seeing here is a steady shift, right? So the customer, and that's why you see that the customer over here, he just made an order for 10. So the highest level of this particular a chart over here, it's just over here, and it gets amplified as you're going down the supply chain. This slide over here can also sort of illustrates something very similar. It's the same phenomena. And over here, you see that the customer is placing an order, but in the warehouse is actually calling in for a bigger size. They're keeping maybe some safety stock. There's bulk discounts. And as they are moving down the supply chain, the distributor keeps an even larger amount of inventory, and the plant supplier keeps an even larger amount of inventory. And so this is, you see the shift. And so now if we go back to the original definition and we read it again, it should hopefully make a whole lot more sense. So let's just look over here. And what it says, the definition, what it says is, the bullwhip effect is a distribution channel phenomena in which forecasts yield supply chain inefficiencies. So the reason, I'm going to stop here just for a second, the reason that they're saying that there are inefficiencies along the supply chain when there is a bullwhip effect is because generally there is additional inventory being held along the supply chain because of the bullwhip effect. This is an inefficiency. Ideally, companies do not want to keep additional inventory. They want to keep just enough. That's also the reason that you hear a lot about just-in-time inventory management. And okay, so now let's move on to the second sentence. The bullwhip effect refers to increasing swings in inventory in response to shifts in customer demand as one moves further along the supply chain. So again, what they're saying is that when there is a shift in the customer demand, then according to the bullwhip effect, there is an increase in the amount of swings in inventory as one moves further up the supply chain. I'm going to read the other definition, also written over here. Shifts in customer demand are magnified the further you move up the supply chain. This leads to large fluctuations in inventory. Okay, so hopefully you have gotten a better idea now of what we're talking about, and especially after looking at this particular slide. But I'm going to give you yet another example because I think it's extremely important for you to understand the bullwhip effect, what we are talking about here. And so over here, this is in this example, this is a Switch watch company, and actually it starts with it's actually talking about the Swiss watch industry, pardon me. And what we see over here is that there is a customer, right over here at the beginning. right on the left-hand side. And this customer has a demand for 3 watches. And as you know, several of the Swiss watches are very pricey and expensive. So, but anyhow, so there's some customer and they're demanding 3 watches. And so they place this order, and at the retailer, they will go to the shop and they place an order for 3 watches. Now what the retailer does is that they go and they contact the wholesaler once they've sold these 3 watches, and they're very happy, and they say, look, we've sold 3 watches, and actually they tell the wholesaler that we would actually like to place an order for 5 watches now, please. And again, the reason is that we want to keep a safety stock. And what that basically means is just some buffer stock or some extra stock in case there's a sudden shift in demand and tomorrow somebody comes in and wants, to buy more watches. And then the wholesaler delivers the 5 watches to the retailer, and but then says, okay, well, I just went ahead and I delivered 5 watches. That's great. Seems like there's demand for these kind of watches. So you know what? Let me reach out to that particular brand or that company, and instead of placing an order for 5 watches, let me place an order for 10 watches. And the reason is that there is a minimum order quantity. So the brand will not allow me to place an order, the wholesaler to place an order for 5. The minimum that they sell is in units of 10. So they call in to the brand, to the company, and they say, look, we would like to place an order for 10 watches. Would that be possible? And the brand says, sure enough, we will deliver you 10 watches. And so the brand is also quite happy about this, but they realize that they want to perhaps order more in a bigger quantity, because they just sold 10. And the brand's reason for ordering more in bulk could be that, look, maybe they get these manufactured in China, let's say, and really doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for them to buy in few units, so they place an order for 50 units at the main supplier. And the main supplier, maybe it's a factory, let's say in China, for example, and since it is a Swiss company, so maybe some portion of the manufacturing is done in China, and perhaps some is done in Switzerland. But anyways, just for the sake of imagination, let's say that the manufacturer, or one of their key manufacturers, is in China. And so they call the manufacturer and they said, look, can you please make 50 pieces of this watch and ship it over to us? And the factory in China says, okay, fine. But the thing is that when they start laying out all the cards on the table and they start planning the manufacturing, they realize that, look, it makes more sense for them to make batches of 100 pieces of the watch. And the reason is, again, it's cost optimization. It's cheaper to buy in bulk quantity. The small components, it really doesn't make sense to keep buying them in small batches because the overall cost will increase. And so they go ahead and they place an order and start manufacturing 100 different watches. So again, what you're seeing over here is a steady increase. You're seeing a steady increase and a fluctuation of the inventory that is steadily increasing or amplifying as you're moving down the supply chain. Now, this is something good, and this is also something a little scary, because remember, the actual demand in this particular or shift in demand that happened in this particular example is just 3 watches. But what's actually happening is that the factory in China is planning to make 100 different watches because of this order that the customer placed. So this is not very efficient, right? There's something that's a little inefficient. Seems like there's some information that's being lost in translation. And look, everybody across the supply chain has their own reason for ordering some extra. but that extra is actually inventory. And when you have a lot of inventory, that's dangerous because companies' money gets stuck in inventory, right? So generally speaking, companies don't like to hold on to a whole lot of inventory. So this is in effect the bullwhip effect. Now, as this lecture goes on, I'll be discussing what are the consequences. What does this mean? And the results of this and how this can be counteracted, because again, this is something very dangerous for factories. For example, somebody, the factory sitting in China making 100 pieces is stuck with those 100 pieces, and if things do not sell, then that is a loss for them. So that's why companies are very interested in reducing the bullwhip effect, and I'll be discussing methods for them to reduce the bullwhip effect. But this is a phenomenal bullwhip effect that does happen in across the board in all industries. All right, this is some information that I have also previously discussed in the last lecture. The last lecture covered various types of forecasting, and I mentioned that there's strategic forecasting that companies do. And strategic forecasting is usually over several years, and these are, large investment decisions. That companies make, could be about capacity, could be, basically on a high level. And we're talking about forecasting over several years. The next type of forecasting is tactical. This is usually done could be done, monthly or quarterly. It's all usually up to a year. And over here, you're looking at various things such as your inventory management, the number of employees you're going to be hiring, um, things along that line. And finally, the operational forecasting, and this is your day-to-day kind of forecasting. How many cars do you need to be, or trucks should be in circulation, and at what time, right? So these are the kind of operational day-to-day decisions. When should you be manufacturing your goods, at what time? Is there certain hours where you should be doing more manufacturing, less? All of that kind of forecasting is more on the operational, it's called operational forecasting. Generally speaking, I also mentioned this, demand planning determines what, when, and how you will be selling. So demand planning is all about, the 4 Ps, what product you want to make, at what price, where do you want to place it, and how are you going to do the promotion. Forecasting in companies for products is usually done for 24 months. So generally speaking, companies should have forecasts for at least 24 months. So this is basically what we're talking about, is you should be having some level of operational, tactical, and strategic level forecasting being done simultaneously. Generally speaking, companies start off when they're doing their forecasting with a baseline forecast. And this is kind of just like, they may, for example, use a cumulative method of forecasting. That would be or naive method of forecasting, or moving average forecasting, any one of these. And that would be their baseline forecast. And then after that, and they have ranges. And then after that, they may make certain shifts to that forecast, those forecasts. So forecasts are not like written in stone. They can be adjusted, and they usually are adjusted. And they are adjusted because of new promotions or price changes or market changes, or maybe there's some innovation or some new product that they're planning to launch. And because of that, their forecasts can be adjusted, and they usually are by companies. So it's sort of a working document that companies have. And again, this is something I'm not going to go in a lot of detail on because I have covered this in detail in the previous lecture. But this is just something very important for you all to know, because these are the kind of things that a company should be forecasting. And if they are not, if they don't have their ears and eyes wide open, and if they are not really planning ahead for all of these various things or all these purposes mentioned over here, then they may run in, they may have certain shortfalls along the way, and they will be responsible for that because they would not have had a proactive approach. They would be having a more reactive approach. And so if you have a reactive approach, what happens is that you're always running after, it's, they call it firefighting, and so you're always kind of just resolving problems. But if you do forecasting and you do it the right way, well in advance, then generally speaking, your day-to-day operations become a lot more efficient, and it's a lot more easier to do your work. And the results are very good. Your profitability also improves. Okay, so I kind of mentioned this a little while earlier in the lecture, but I'm going to mention this again in detail. The shifts that happen in the supply chain could be inherent or real volatility, or they could be self-induced volatility. So let me talk about both of these a little bit more. Inherent volatility happens, it's also called real volatility, right? When, for example, something external is happening in the market. And right now we're going through coronavirus. And so if there is, for example, all of a sudden, if you go to any big grocery store, you'll be seeing that people are hoarding certain things. For example, sanitizers, right? So there's all of a sudden a huge shift or a huge volatility for in the sales of sanitizers. And it's a very real volatility. And this is not something that the company has induced, any sanitizer company has induced. It's just that the external events have caused this volatility. Now, that's one reason. There could be other things that happen that cause volatility. So other than coronavirus, sometimes there are products that sell more in various seasons. So for example, lawn, clothes, they sell in summer. And so obviously this is something that the season changes, and this creates the volatility automatically. And obviously lawn doesn't sell in winter as much, right? There could be, some new competitors, some new innovations that come into the market that all of a sudden change the dynamics of the market and cause volatility. So these are all examples of inherent volatility or real volatility. But then there are other times that companies actually create volatility. And examples of this is, when, for example, a company gives discounts and offers sales. And what they're doing is that they're luring customers to come in and buy their products. And they're actually, trying to increase their sales by virtue of giving these discounts. They're push sales. This is a push tactic, right? You're really trying, you have got this inventory, you're trying to get rid of this inventory, and so you are inducing volatility in the supply chain. And so, an example of this would be you go to a store and you're in the market to buy soap, and all of a sudden you go and you say, you see that soaps are selling at, 2 for 1. Buy 2 soaps for the price of 1. And some people say, oh, wow, you know what? Let's just buy 8 bars of soap, because we're not going to be able to get this kind of sale later on. And so this causes, a huge an upswing in the sales that the company is able to make. Okay, so hope you understood that. aspect. And again, this the reason for me going into all of this is that you need to understand where the genesis or where the beginning of the bullwhip effect starts. So sometimes companies, a lot of people have asked me, students in the past, that, hey, isn't it great that some stores offer discounts? Isn't it really really good? Well, yes and no. Absolutely, they are able to get rid of a lot of their inventory, but generally speaking, that's not something very healthy from a supply chain point of view. Most companies like to be able to sell at the full price, because this is it keeps the value of the brand high. And it's something that is a very healthy sign if they're not giving that many sales. On the other hand, though, nowadays it almost seems that sales have become just part of the product life cycle. And so you see many times that there is, for example, certain brands always have summer sales and winter sales. And so that's just something that they plan for, and they execute it accordingly. But all in all, companies shouldn't be having to rely on sales. And so that's not considered. And the reason is that it reflects an increase in inventory that's not being able to be sold very easily. And inventory in general is not good. A high level of inventory in supply chain management is never good. You want to be able to match the demand. So the amount that you're manufacturing should match, it should be at the same rate as the demand for products. If you're manufacturing a lot more and the demand is less, that's a problem, and vice versa is also a problem. Okay, now let's talk about, high demand volatility and what is the really bad thing about when you have a lot of volatility across the supply chain. And I started talking a little bit about this when I said that you're stuck with a whole lot of inventory in your supply chain. But let's look a little bit deeper. So when there is a lot of sorry about that, when there is a bullwhip effect, and when there is a huge shift in inventory along the supply chain, what happens is that there is an increased need for capital investment. So, for example, we discussed the Swiss watches example, and now all of a sudden, there was a demand for 3 watches, and the customers went and they bought 3 watches, and then all of a sudden there was, as I mentioned in the example, 100 watches being manufactured in China. Well, maybe they had to hire additional, staff to manufacture those 100 watches all of a sudden. And so that's capital investment. That's an example of capital investment. So it's not really as if, there's an order for 100 watches, but you're still adding into your capital investment. So that's one of the big issues with the bullwhip effect. Also, product quality can be impacted. In general, in the ideal situation, there should be a steady rate of manufacturing. When there is a sudden hike or a sudden decrease, this may impact product quality. And the reason is that many times your employees could be really being pushed to their limit with the amount of work that they're having to do if there's a huge order that comes in all of a sudden. And so maybe some employees are having to do work of 2 employees, or doing like a lot of overtime. And this is something that generally companies like to avoid. So they have a certain amount of capital expenditure, amount of employees, and they basically have that based on a steady rate of manufacturing. So when there are fluctuations, this product quality can be impacted. There's lower efficiency as well. And what this means is that, the things that are going to be being made, maybe taking effectively per good a little bit of longer time, because again, your infrastructure, your employees, everything is being pushed to its limit, and that over a sustained period of time reduces efficiency. There's also the bullwhip effect, many times decreases employee morale. Employees are just really, they feel that, sometimes they're just sitting idle when when there's no demand or low demand, and other times they're being pushed to the limit. And so this can have a very negative effect on employee morale, and this is connected to the lower efficiency as well. There may be other hidden costs as a result of demand volatility. Okay, so this is also something interesting. What I'm going to be discussing next is, which is okay. So now, so far, we've kind of discussed, what causes the bullwhip effect, but how can this be sort of regulated? And one of the things is that the review time. So you need to sort of keep a check and keep reviewing regularly what the actual situation in the market is and how much you are manufacturing, right? So that's one way. The more times you review the inventory situation versus what's happening in the market, you can regulate the bullwhip effect. Also, when the lead time is increased, the bullwhip effect also increases. And what this means is lead time is basically the time from when the order is actually placed for a good till the time it reaches the customer. And so when you take a really long time to manufacture something and give it to a customer, the bullwhip effect is increased. And if you think about why, well, there's a lot of changes that happen. And if you're taking a really, really long time to deliver something, by the time you deliver it, the whole situation may have changed. So generally speaking, if it's if you're efficient and quick, and your lead time is low, your bullwhip effect is going to be low. If you're constantly checking what the situation is in the market and you're manufacturing accordingly, the bullwhip will be reduced. Also, this is something else to keep in mind is that the more accurate your forecasting is, the lower the bullwhip effect is going to be. And what for this, it mentions over here in this slide, the number of periods included in M forecast is decreased. And what I mean by this is that the more information you take into account while making forecasts, the more that will impact the accuracy of your forecast. And if your forecast is really accurate, then the probability of your bullwhip effect reducing increases. Okay, so that's quite a bit that we covered regarding the bullwhip effect. And, I hope you have understood it. This is something that if you actually speak to manufacturing concerns, they can definitely, people in manufacturing, they can definitely give you some more examples. But it also, just makes logical sense if you actually think about it. Okay, so now next up, I'm going to be discussing how can companies reduce the bullwhip effect. What other things? So there were just three things, high-level things that I just discussed, but more concrete things to reduce the bullwhip effect. Because again, the bullwhip effect creates a lot of inefficiencies across the supply chain. So let's go through these. The first one is perhaps one that I think is one of my favorite ways. And this is improving your forecast methodology. And what this means is that, look, you may be, a manufacturer. You may be a manufacturer sitting in China, right? Far, far away. And you're going ahead, you're manufacturing 100 watches, and you say, you know what, that's fine, because this is something, we just got this order and it's fine. We're just doing it. We're just following orders from, the brand. The brand told us make 100 watches and we're making it. But that's not necessarily the smart thing to do. It's a very important for everybody across the supply chain to understand what's actually happening at the point of sale, meaning what is happening in the market, how many goods are actually selling in the market. So, for example, there may be right now with the coronavirus going on, and I discussed this a little while ago, there's an increase in demand of sanitizers. Now, okay, fine, that's good, but we all know that this is a temporary phenomena, right? So if the manufacturers of sanitizers don't keep their eye on what's happening in the market, they could go in and make like 1 billion units of sanitizers, and that's not smart. They may say that, look, that's what we got the order for, but it's important for them to ask questions and for there to be transparency across the supply chain. So it's important for them to know that, look, hey, in reality, the maximum that number of sanitizers of a certain brand that will be sold is 5 million. So making like 1 billion doesn't even make any sense. And so, that's very important to do. And eliminate multiple forecasts that use intermediate. And again, this is saying the same thing. So in the first one, the first bullet in the first point says eliminate multiple forecasts that use only intermediate partners order data. And that's what I just explained. When you just uh, listen to your immediate partner's order and you make an order because your immediate partner just said make this order, that's not the smart approach. You have to sort of have an idea of what's actually happening. Employ POS or end consumer data if possible. And so this is where they're talking about the slide is talking about, getting your hands on actually what's happening in the market. Finally, avoid nervous forecasting techniques. And by this, they basically are saying that, look, better to use cumulative forecasting and, moving average forecasting versus naive forecasting. All right, the next thing, design single stage replenishment control. So here in this, I'm just going to, summarize it. But basically what happens is usually companies have to call in regularly and say, can you manufacture X number of things for us? And that's how it works. But it's smart to also have some systems in place that make it completely transparent how much inventory various people along the supply chain have, and when there is the inventory levels start going low, you can automatically replenish the inventory. So you don't wait for somebody to call you and say, look, the inventory is falling low, can you please manufacture more? This is an example of something called single stage replenishment control. So you're constantly, replenishing, you have a replenishing control in place. And so that's the second important point. The third thing, which I had discussed a little earlier as well, is shortening lead time and review period times. And so I had discussed that a little bit before, so I'm not going to go too much in detail. But again, it's best to sort of take less time to deliver goods and to manufacture goods and send it to the customer, because the market situation is constantly changing and evolving. And if you are going to take extremely long time, you have very long lead times, then that's not going to be very beneficial to you. You also want to frequently review the inventory situation, and you, what you don't want is that you just are blindfolded, you're just kind of just going ahead and working, you have your blinders on, and you're not being able to see what the actual situation in the market is. All right, going forward, reduce batching of orders. And so what happens many times is people, companies make huge batches, and and that's when they sell goods. So they say, for example, a manufacturer may say, oh, I'm going to only sell you in bulk. My minimum order quantity is, let's say, 50,000. Generally speaking, that causes an increase in the bullwhip effect across the supply chain. It's a lot smarter to reduce batching. If there are orders that are coming in, could be smaller, could be larger, um, you know, you try and fulfill those orders, and so you shift from a minimum order quantity to more of a minimum volume quantity. And so you're not really saying you have to order X amount. You build in some flexibility, and nowadays a lot of companies also have online methods to place orders, and so uh, you want to be able to make it a little bit more flexible. If you make people just order in huge bulks, then they get stuck with a lot of the inventory, and it gets very difficult for them to sell the inventory, and so there's more fluctuation across the supply chain. Reduce incentives of forward buying, and this is something very interesting. Generally speaking, nowadays sales discounts, especially during periods of recessions, are something that encourages people to do forward buying or buy in advance and stock up or pile up. For example, I gave you guys the example of soaps a little while earlier, and so the idea is that you are incentivizing people to just sort of buy in bulk. That's not very smart, because again, you are adding to fluctuation across the supply chain. So if you may be able to sell in the short run a lot, but then there may be a period where you're not able to sell for a longer period of time, and during that period of time you still have to pay all your bills, and you have to pay all of your the general operational costs. So it's a lot smarter to try and avoid giving too many promotions, price promotions, discounts in supply chains. Finally, let's see, I hope I'm not missing any. Yeah, finally, the last one is better sharing of information. This is something that there is a lot of work going on internationally. The whole idea of sharing what is actually happening across the supply chain, sharing information, not just of your most immediate partner, but beyond that. And nowadays, there are certain softwares such as collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment softwares that a lot of companies are using. And the whole idea is that this facilitates sharing of information across the supply chain. So other volatility management strategies. Okay, so now this is just, last slide, and then I'm just going to sum up the bullwhip effect. Here, the whole idea is that, first of all, there's certain things that you should be having, such as there should be a lot of supply chain discipline and internal collaboration across the supply chain. So there should be a lot efficient, you should be sharing information efficiency across the supply chain. And I've discussed this earlier as well. The second is supply buffer management. So you definitely need to keep some safety stock wherever you are along the supply chain. But how much is something you need to determine. You don't want to keep too much of stock, that because your money is going to get stuck, but you don't want to keep too little stock as well. So it's very important to have good buffer management, supply buffer management policies in place, and to think through that well in advance. Lower cycle time strategy, you want to make things as, the process is as efficient, as effective as possible. Another method that is used to reduce supply chain volatility is postponement strategy. And I have discussed this in previous lectures, but just to give you an example of what a postponement strategy is that the goods are not kept in inventory finished. So basically you have goods that are half made goods put in your inventory, and the idea is that you want to you keep them half made because you want to customize them and deliver them to the customer as per the customer's specifications once you get the order. And so this is something that companies use quite often nowadays. It's becoming very popular as a supply chain strategy. So this is something else that can be used to reduce your bullwhip effect. And finally, collaborative process with supplier negotiated rates. So again, you do not, with your partners, you do not want to see them as an anti-party. You actually are all working for the same purpose. And so you want to have a collaborative process of where you're working as a team. And so yes, you're doing business and all of that, but when you work as a team, in net results are beneficial for all involved. So this particular slide gives you a synopsis. It gives you, it sort of covers a lot of what we have discussed in this lecture. So just to give you a quick overview, supply chain coordination, this what this is. It's increase in variability as you move upstream in inventory. And this results, supply chain bullwhip effect results in increased costs, less efficiency, and lower profits. So this is, the bullwhip effect is actually something very, very serious. Because again, let's just think about why we're saying this. Increased costs, you're making a lot more. So that requires a lot of capital expenditure, less efficiency. We mentioned this sometimes that you're exceeding your capacity. And so the efficiency goes down, and you're net, you're reducing your profits when there's a bullwhip effect in the supply chain. The causes of bullwhip effect include misaligned incentives and behavior, poor demand forecasting, and order batching and timing. So again, these are some of the key reasons for the bullwhip effect. And then, ways of counteracting the bullwhip effect. And this is just a summary of all the points that I went through, and you can go ahead and read this when you get some time. So this brings me to the end of the bullwhip effect lecture. And next up, I will be going through the PSO case study, in which you actually see the bullwhip effect playing out. And you see how in real life companies deal with the bullwhip effect, and all the various aspects that need to be considered by companies to avoid the bullwhip effect going forward. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I will be speaking to you soon about the PSO case study. All right, take good care. Bye.